Alien girl returned to thank the human for a rescue. Yet what she thanked him for wasn't survival. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Lucas Miller had never considered himself a hero. In fact, he was just another ordinary man, working as a paramedic on a small outpost on the edge of human space. His days were spent saving lives in the most mundane of circumstances, from minor injuries to urgent rescues. But nothing had prepared him for the moment when his ship crash-landed on an alien planet, an unknown world far from Earth. After the impact, when the smoke had cleared and Lucas emerged from his protective suit, he found himself stranded in a desolate, frozen landscape. The shuttle had been severely damaged, the communication systems knocked out, and the life support was beginning to fail. Alone and running out of time, he made his way through the thick, snow-laden winds, his thoughts clouded with frustration and fear. But then, something caught his eye, a flash of movement. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a fragment of debris or a strange reflection. But as he squinted through the haze, he saw her. She was tall, with glowing orange skin and hair that flowed like molten lava, her eyes gleaming with a piercing gold. A creature unlike any human he had ever seen. Yet in that moment, she didn't seem like a threat. She seemed just as lost and vulnerable as he was. Without thinking, Lucas approached. His training kicked in. He needed to help, to rescue her, no matter who or what she was. She looked up at him, her eyes full of confusion, fear, and something else. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching him with a quiet intensity that made Lucas question if she knew more than she was letting on. As Lucas made his way closer, the woman spoke in a deep, melodic voice that the translator in his helmet couldn't quite decipher. Her tone was both regal and wary, as if she were used to dealing with creatures who couldn't be trusted. But Lucas wasn't just another soldier or another lost traveler. He was a paramedic, and so, without hesitation, he offered her a hand, pulling her into the shelter he had created. There, in the warmth of the emergency space, they exchanged nothing more than the silent understanding of two beings who had found themselves on the edge of survival. He wasn't sure why he had done it. Was it compassion? Or was it the strange pull she had on him? Either way, the connection was undeniable. And as the storm outside raged on, Lucas realized something about this alien he had saved. There was more to this encounter than just survival. When the storm finally settled, and the emergency systems flickered to life, the alien woman, who introduced herself as Alira, returned to Lucas. She came not just to thank him for his rescue, but for something far more unexpected. She thanked him for showing her something she had long forgotten, the possibility of trust. It wasn't just about surviving the cold or the storm. It was about finding something deeper, something worth fighting for. Lucas felt a surge of emotion that he hadn't anticipated. He had expected gratitude, but not this. Alira's eyes softened, the walls she had built over years of solitude starting to crumble. "You didn't just save me," she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "You gave me hope again." As the days passed, Lucas found himself settling into an unexpected routine with Alira. The alien who had once been an enigma now felt like an inseparable part of his life on the strange planet. Their survival had become a quiet partnership, each day a delicate balance of learning about each other. The harsh conditions of the planet seemed almost secondary to the bond they were forming, as they both adapted to their new reality. Lucas had always been a man of action, someone who was used to saving lives, but now, the role he played was more personal than he could have ever anticipated. Alira, despite her stunning appearance and regal aura, was not the untouchable queen he had imagined. Instead, she was vulnerable, deeply affected by her past and the trauma she had faced. She had survived alone for so long, yet her gratitude to Lucas for the simple act of saving her life had unlocked something in her that she hadn't realized was missing: trust. Each time they spoke, Lucas could see the walls Alira had built around herself slowly crumbling, replaced by a subtle warmth that Lucas hadn't expected. She would sit with him by the fire in the shelter, her radiant golden eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, an emotion she was learning to embrace. One evening, as they sat in the quiet glow of their makeshift camp, Lucas noticed something different in her gaze. It was a softness, a shift in how she saw him. The air between them had changed, subtle but undeniable. Elira wasn't just thanking him anymore. There was a connection, a deeper understanding that neither of them had spoken aloud, but both could feel. For Lucas, it was unexpected. He had never thought much about aliens before. They were a distant part of the universe, something far away and foreign. But here, now, with Elira, he realized how much more there was to learn. "You've shown me so much," Elira said one night, her voice quiet but sincere. "I thought I could never trust again. I thought I was meant to live alone, forever. But you—" She paused, her fingers brushing the edge of her sleeve. "You made me feel safe again." Her words struck Lucas in a way he couldn't fully explain. He wasn't a man who sought recognition, much less praise. Yet here was this beautiful alien woman, who had lived through hardships he couldn't imagine, opening up to him in a way that made him feel like the most important person in the universe. "It's nothing," Lucas replied, his voice hoarse, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to this kind of intimacy, especially not with someone so different. "It's just what I do. I'm just glad I could help." Elira shook her head slightly, her long, copper-colored hair catching the light of the dying fire. "No," she said softly. "You didn't just help me survive. You helped me live again." The words hung in the air, thick with emotion. Lucas didn't know how to react, but something deep inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A connection, a spark of something he didn't want to ignore. As the days turned into weeks, their bond continued to grow. They would spend hours talking about their respective worlds, sharing stories of Earth and her home planet, both learning the intricacies of each other's cultures. Lucas was fascinated by the depth of Elira's history, her people's customs, their struggles and triumphs. And in return, Elira listened intently as Lucas spoke about the human experience, about Earth's challenges and wonders. One evening, as they gazed up at the stars, Lucas couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He hadn't expected any of this. The rescue, the survival, and now, the companionship. It was all more than he had ever imagined when he had first stepped onto this alien world. Elira's presence in his life was something he hadn't thought he needed, but now, it felt impossible to imagine life without her. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were partners, in every sense of the word. And though their journey was far from over, Lucas knew one thing for certain. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Days passed, and the bond between Lucas and Elira continued to grow stronger. With each passing moment, Lucas found himself more captivated by her presence. Her once cold, guarded demeanor had softened, revealing a woman full of wisdom, resilience, and untold stories. Elira had begun to trust him, but there was still a distance, an invisible barrier between them. They had shared many moments of laughter, conversations that spanned hours, but there were still things unsaid, things that lingered in the air like an unfinished melody. One evening, as the cold winds howled outside, Lucas found himself sitting across from Elira by the fire. The warmth of the flames danced in her eyes, and the firelight illuminated her striking features. There was a quiet strength in the way she sat, her posture regal yet relaxed, a contradiction that both intrigued and amazed him. "You know," Lucas began, breaking the silence, "I've never thought much about what life would be like here, on a strange planet, far from Earth, with nothing but the stars to guide us." Elira turned to him, her golden eyes gleaming with a curious light. "And now?" she asked, her voice soft yet steady. "Now, I think I could get used to it," he replied, his gaze lingering on her. There was a hint of something in his voice, something deeper than just the situation they were in. Elira noticed it too. Her heart seemed to skip a beat, but she quickly masked the feeling. "I never imagined I would find myself in this situation," she said, her tone thoughtful. "In this place, with a human. I used to think of your kind as nothing more than simple, primitive beings, but now I see that there is more to you." Lucas looked at her, surprised by her words. "I didn't expect that either," he said, his voice low, almost contemplative. The shift in their relationship had been subtle, but undeniable. Every day, they learned more about each other. There were moments when Lucas would catch Alira watching him, her expression unreadable. And there were times when their eyes would meet, and for a split second, it felt as though they shared a secret that only the two of them understood. As days turned into weeks, they began to grow closer. They would share meals, talk about their respective worlds, and exchange stories that were both humorous and heartbreaking. Alira spoke of her home planet, a place of great beauty but also great hardship. She had been born into royalty, but her life had not been as glamorous as many might have assumed. "I once thought I was meant to rule," Alira said one evening, her voice tinged with regret. "But I was wrong. I was meant to learn, to understand, not to control." Lucas listened intently, his heart aching for her. He had no idea of the weight she carried, the burden of her past. "You don't have to be a ruler to make a difference," he said softly. "Sometimes, just being there for someone is enough." Alira smiled, a rare, soft smile that made Lucas' heart skip. "You may be right," she said. "But sometimes I wonder if I could have done more." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. The warmth of the fire flickered between them, a symbol of the growing connection they shared. Lucas had never felt this way before, not with anyone. And Alira, despite her reluctance to admit it, had begun to feel the same. There was something in the air, something unspoken yet powerful, that bound them together. And though neither of them dared to speak it aloud, they both knew that their lives had changed in ways they couldn't yet fully comprehend. In the quiet of the night, as the stars sparkled above them, it was clear that they were no longer just two strangers in a harsh, alien world. They had become something more, something deeper, something neither of them had expected, but both had come to need. The days that followed were filled with a quiet rhythm, a routine that Lucas had come to cherish. They spent their time in the shelter, working together to repair what they could of the damaged equipment and taking moments to simply sit together in the warmth of the fire. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Lucas and Alira grew deeper, something unspoken and undeniable lingering in the air whenever they were near. Lucas found himself drawn to her strength and vulnerability, two sides of the same coin that made her not just the alien queen she had once been, but someone much more complex, someone he could never have anticipated understanding. And Alira, despite her once unshakable confidence, found herself trusting him more with each passing day. There were times when she would catch herself studying him, his every gesture, every word, and wonder how he could be so different from what she had been taught to believe about humans. It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything felt still and right, that they found themselves alone in the shelter, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft hum of their worn-out equipment. Alira was seated across from Lucas, her gaze fixed on the flames. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavy, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was the kind of silence that said more than words could. "I never thought I would be here," Alira said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas looked up at her, meeting her gaze. "Here? On this planet?" he asked, his tone soft but curious. Alira shook her head slightly, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "No, not just here. With you. I thought I was beyond feeling this way. I've spent so many years believing that I had to be alone, that I had to distance myself from others." Lucas didn't know what to say at first. The truth was, he hadn't expected any of this. He had saved her out of instinct, out of the need to help, never imagining that it would lead them to this quiet, profound connection. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep within him. "You don't have to distance yourself." Alira's eyes softened, and for a moment, Lucas saw the real vulnerability beneath the strength she had always worn as armor. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted, her voice almost trembling. "How do I learn to trust again?" Lucas took a breath, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. "It's not easy. Trust is something that takes time, and it's not something you can just force. But it starts with letting someone in. And I promise, I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long time, Alira smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her face. It was a smile Lucas had never expected to see from her, but now that he had, he realized it was the one thing he had been waiting for. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet sincerity. "For everything." Lucas nodded, his heart swelling with something he couldn't quite explain. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to feel so deeply for someone from a different world, a different life. But here they were, standing on the edge of something neither of them fully understood, and yet, both felt drawn to. As the fire flickered and the night grew colder, Lucas and Alira sat in the warmth of their shared silence. They didn't need to say anything else. The connection was there, undeniable, and for the first time in a long time, both of them felt as though they were not alone anymore. It was a quiet promise between them, one that neither could fully articulate, but one that both of them knew was real. They were no longer just two strangers thrown together by fate. They were something more, and whatever the future held, they would face it together. The days continued to pass quietly, with Lucas and Alira settling into a rhythm that felt comfortable, though not without its moments of uncertainty. The planet they were stranded on remained as cold and desolate as the day they first arrived, but within their shelter, a warmth grew. It wasn't just the fire that kept them alive. It was the bond they had begun to form, an understanding that transcended words. As time passed, Lucas became more attuned to Alira's mannerisms, her silences, her gestures. He had never thought much about the complexities of alien cultures, let alone the subtleties of alien emotions. But with Alira, everything felt different. She wasn't just an alien. She was a person, someone with her own dreams, fears, and desires, all hidden behind her otherworldly appearance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the icy landscape outside, Alira sat near the fire, her gaze distant. Lucas noticed the change in her demeanor, the way her expression had become more serious, her thoughts seemingly drifting far away. He watched her for a moment, then spoke quietly. "What's on your mind?" Alira turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his with a kind of quiet intensity. "I've been thinking about my people," she said, her voice softer than usual. "About what I left behind." Lucas remained silent, sensing the depth of her words. Alira had never really spoken much about her past, and though he knew she was from a royal lineage, she hadn't shared the details of her life before their crash. He could feel her longing, the weight of everything she had lost. "What happened to them?" Lucas asked, his voice gentle, offering her a safe space to speak. Alira hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of her cloak. "My family, they were part of a long-standing empire. My father was a ruler, a king of sorts. But my world—" She paused, her eyes clouded with something darker. "It was always about power, control. I was supposed to lead, to continue the legacy, but I couldn't. I wanted something different. I didn't want to be a part of that life anymore." Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. Lucas felt a pang of sympathy for her, understanding the kind of burden she carried. She had been thrust into a role that she never wanted, forced into a life that no one should have to live. "What happened after you left?" he asked, his curiosity growing, though he sensed the pain her answer might bring. Alira took a deep breath, her eyes searching the fire for a moment. "I had to run. It wasn't safe for me anymore. My people, they saw my decision as a betrayal. A queen leaving her throne is unforgivable. I had to leave everything behind, my family, my planet, my life. All for a chance at freedom." There was a long silence between them, one that spoke volumes about the kind of strength Alira had within her. It wasn't just her physical resilience. It was her emotional fortitude, her ability to survive despite the weight of the world that had been placed on her shoulders. Lucas didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded, acknowledging the gravity of her words. Alira's gaze softened, and for the first time, Lucas saw something else in her eyes, vulnerability. "I don't know what's next for me, Lucas. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." Her voice cracked slightly, and Lucas felt a surge of empathy. He could see the depth of her struggle, the uncertainty that plagued her every thought. "You don't have to know right now," Lucas said, his voice steady, filled with reassurance. "What you've already done is enough. You've survived. You've made it this far, and you don't have to figure it all out today. We're here together. That's all that matters." Alira looked at him, her expression softening, the walls she had carefully constructed around herself beginning to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, the words almost lost in the quiet hum of the fire. Lucas gave her a small, understanding smile, knowing that the journey they had started together was far from over. But in that moment, it didn't matter. For the first time since their crash, they were no longer just two lost souls stranded on a barren world. They were something more, partners, friends, and perhaps, in time, something even deeper. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and that thought gave them both the strength to continue. As the night stretched on, they sat side by side, the silence between them now one of mutual understanding, a quiet comfort that neither had known they needed. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time, it seemed less daunting. Together, they had already begun to rebuild something neither of them could have imagined alone. As the weeks continued to pass on the frozen planet, the bond between Lucas and Elira deepened. The fire in their small shelter had become a symbol of the warmth they had found in each other. They were no longer just two beings stranded on a desolate world, but two individuals connected by a shared purpose and a growing understanding of one another. Lucas had come to realize that this journey, this survival, was more than just a fight against the harsh elements. It was about healing, both for him and for Elira. Despite the vast differences in their backgrounds, they had found common ground in their shared humanity. Elira had slowly begun to open up more about her past, her struggles, and her fears. It was clear that her life had been one of both privilege and burden. As a member of a royal lineage, she had been trained to lead, to rule, but it was a role she had never truly wanted. Her escape from her world had been both an act of defiance and one of self-preservation. She had not just fled her home. She had fled the life that had been imposed upon her. Lucas had listened carefully, never interrupting, as Elira spoke about the expectations placed on her, the political intrigues of her people, and the weight of leadership she had been forced to bear. She had never had the chance to live for herself. "I was always expected to be someone I couldn't be," she had said one evening, her voice heavy with emotion. "I was never allowed to make my own choices, to decide who I wanted to be. I thought running away would free me, but I've never felt more lost." Lucas had never felt such empathy for anyone before. He had his own struggles, his own demons, but Elira's pain struck a chord with him. He had always been the one to rescue, to save, but now he realized that he too needed saving, in a way. He needed her, not just for the companionship, but because, in her, he saw the strength to keep moving forward. They had both been through unimaginable hardships, and yet here they were, surviving together. One night, as they sat together in their shelter, the fire casting long shadows against the walls, Lucas turned to Elira. "You're not lost," he said, his voice steady. "You're here, and that's what matters. You've made it this far, and you're stronger than you think." Elira looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face. For a moment, there was a silence, a moment of understanding between them. "I don't know if I'm strong," she admitted. "I don't know if I can keep going." Lucas took her hand in his, offering her the same reassurance he had given himself countless times. "You don't have to know right now," he said softly. "One step at a time. We'll face whatever comes together." The sincerity in his voice made Elira's heart flutter. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her journey. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world by herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas smiled, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. They had come a long way since their first meeting, from two strangers caught in a storm to two people who had found something worth fighting for. Elira had spent her life running from her past, from her people, but now, for the first time, she felt like she could face her future, whatever that future might be, with Lucas by her side. The days ahead remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face them together, and that was enough to give them both hope. The planet around them was still cold and unforgiving, but in the warmth of their shared bond, they had found a refuge that neither had expected but both had come to need. The days continued to unfold, with the rhythm of survival settling into an almost comfortable routine. Lucas and Elira had become more than just two people stranded on a foreign world. They had become a team, a partnership that had developed through mutual respect, shared hardships, and the undeniable connection that had grown between them. The planet, with its frozen tundra and constant winds, still felt hostile, but the small shelter they had created together was a haven, a place of warmth amidst the cold. Lucas often found himself marveling at the strength that Elira possessed. She had endured so much, and yet, here she was, not just surviving but beginning to thrive. Her alien heritage, with its regal bearing and untold history, had once set her apart from him. But now, he saw her as someone who had been shaped by her experiences, someone he could relate to in ways he had never imagined possible. Alira, too, had begun to see Lucas in a new light. He had saved her life, yes, but it was more than that. He had shown her kindness, patience, and something she had never fully understood, selflessness. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was no longer a burden, no longer a prisoner of her past. She was free, not just from her planet, but from the weight of expectations that had defined her existence for so long. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the icy landscape, Lucas found himself sitting beside Alira by the fire, a rare moment of quiet between them. The warmth of the flames flickered in her eyes, and for a moment, Lucas wondered what the future might hold. "I never imagined I would find someone like you," Alira said suddenly, breaking the silence. Lucas looked up at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "Someone like me?" he asked, his tone soft, unsure of what she meant. Alira smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Someone who doesn't look at me like I'm some untouchable being. Someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I was supposed to be." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat, but he swallowed it down, nodding. "I don't know what to say to that," he admitted. "I just saw you, Alira. I saw someone who needed help, and I gave it. And, I guess, it turned into something more." Alira's eyes softened, her gaze never leaving his. "It did," she whispered. The air between them seemed to hum with an unspoken understanding, a connection that neither could deny. It was as if, in that moment, everything they had been through, every struggle, every hardship, had led them here, to this quiet understanding. Lucas had never been one to dwell on emotions, but with Alira, it was different. He felt something stir within him, something he hadn't felt in years. He had always been a man of action, of survival, but now, with Alira, he realized that survival wasn't enough. They needed more. "I'm glad you're here," Lucas said, his voice barely a whisper. Alira looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face, and for a moment, Lucas thought she might say something, but instead, she simply nodded, a small, tender smile playing at the corner of her lips. The moment hung between them, filled with everything that needed to be said but wasn't. They didn't need words to understand each other anymore. The world outside their shelter might still be a cold, desolate place, but inside, in that small, shared space, they had found something that made the cold less harsh and the silence more meaningful. Together, they had built something that was more than just survival. It was something deeper, something that neither of them had expected but both had come to cherish. As the fire crackled and the stars began to emerge in the sky above, they sat in silence, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. In the quiet of that moment, the future didn't seem so uncertain. It seemed possible, and for the first time since their crash, that was enough. The wind howled outside, rattling the thin walls of their shelter, but inside, Lucas and Alira sat in a calm, unspoken understanding. The fire crackled softly between them, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It had been weeks since the crash, and in that time, they had not only survived but had begun to build something together. The bond they shared had grown beyond mere survival. There were no more walls between them, no more barriers of understanding. They had found a rhythm, a flow that allowed them to work in harmony, each knowing the other's strengths, and more importantly, the unspoken trust that had developed between them. One evening, as the planet's icy winds blew outside, Alira sat cross-legged near the fire, her gaze fixed on the flames. Lucas, seated beside her, noticed how her golden eyes seemed to dance with the firelight, reflecting something deeper, something he hadn't seen before. It was a quiet sadness, tinged with a longing that Alira had not spoken of in a long time. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked gently, his voice low, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace between them. Alira's eyes flickered to him, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate. Then, with a small sigh, she spoke. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "When I first arrived here, I thought I was beyond help. I thought I was broken, that nothing could ever be the same again. She paused, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her cloak. But now, I feel different. I feel like I have a chance at something more. Something I didn't think was possible. Lucas watched her carefully, sensing the weight of her words. Elira had been through so much. Her past had been one of royal expectation, burdened by the weight of her family's legacy, and her escape from that life had left scars that ran deeper than any physical injury. But here, in this desolate place, she had found something she had never thought possible: peace. She had found a partner in him, someone who saw her for who she was, not who she was supposed to be. Lucas reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "You're not broken," he said quietly, his voice firm but warm. "You're stronger than you realize. You've been through so much, but look at where we are now. We're surviving, together. And that's something no one can take away from us." Elira turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his, a gesture that spoke volumes. She gave him a small, soft smile. "Thank you," she whispered, the words simple, but full of meaning. It was in that moment that Lucas realized just how much they had come to rely on each other. They had both been broken in their own ways, but together, they were stronger than they had ever been alone. The isolation of the planet, the harsh conditions that had once seemed impossible to endure, now felt like a distant memory. They were no longer just survivors. They had become something more. They had become a family, of sorts, bound not by blood, but by their shared experiences and the trust they had built. As the night wore on, the fire began to die down, and a quiet calm settled over them. Lucas and Elira didn't speak for a long time, but the silence was comfortable. It was the kind of silence that existed between two people who understood each other without the need for words. Finally, as the last embers of the fire flickered, Elira spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we'll ever get off this planet?" she asked, her tone thoughtful, but not filled with the fear that had once accompanied such a question. Lucas smiled softly, looking out at the endless night through the small, frosted window. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but it doesn't matter. As long as we're together, I think we'll be okay." Elira nodded slowly, the weight of her past still there, but no longer defining her. "I think so too," she said, her voice steady. And for the first time since they had crash-landed on this cold, unfamiliar world, Lucas believed it too. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. They had already survived the worst, and together, they were ready for whatever came next. The days grew longer, and the frozen landscape outside their shelter seemed to stretch endlessly. But Lucas and Elira had found a sense of peace within their little world. The planet remained unforgiving, but with each other, they felt stronger, more capable of facing whatever came next. They had learned to live not just for survival, but for the small moments that made their existence meaningful: quiet nights by the fire, shared meals, and the companionship that neither of them had expected to find. The bond between them had deepened in ways neither could have imagined, and with each passing day, their relationship had evolved into something more than either of them had anticipated. Elira had stopped looking back at her past with the same sense of regret and longing. She had found something new, something worth fighting for, and that was enough to give her hope again. She had never allowed herself to truly trust another person, yet here she was, relying on Lucas not just for her survival, but for her heart to heal. And Lucas, who had always been a loner, found that he was no longer content with just existing. His life had purpose now, and that purpose was rooted in the woman sitting beside him. One evening, as they sat together, watching the last light of the sun fade over the horizon, Elira turned to Lucas with a quiet, contemplative expression. "Lucas," she began, her voice soft but steady, "do you ever think about what comes next?" Lucas raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" he asked, his gaze turning to meet hers. Elira's golden eyes seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken thoughts, and for a moment, Lucas wondered what she was truly asking. "I mean, after all this, the planet, the survival. Do you think about what happens after? When we're no longer just trying to stay alive?" The question hung in the air, and Lucas felt a shift within him. It was as though the weight of everything they had been through, the crash, the struggles, the isolation, was finally coming to a head. "I think about it," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "I think about what we can do after. But the truth is, I don't know. I'm not sure what the future holds for us. But I know that whatever it is, I want to face it with you. Elira looked at him, her eyes softening, and for the first time, Lucas saw the vulnerability she had kept hidden. It was a rawness, an honesty that made her even more real to him. I want that too, she said quietly. I want to keep moving forward, not just for survival, but for something more. Lucas smiled, his heart swelling with something he hadn't fully recognized before. Then we will, he said with certainty. We'll make it work, whatever comes next. Together. The wind outside howled louder, but in that moment, everything felt still. The quiet understanding between them was unspoken, yet it was clear to both of them. They had found a future together, not in the distant stars, but in the here and now. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The planet might be cold and unyielding, but they had found warmth in each other. And as they sat together, watching the darkness settle over the world outside, they knew that this, right here, was where they were meant to be.